Wine poised to pour, she caught the whispered plot. The moment he says, "Cheers, we will finish him." The Mafia Don, blissfully unaware, was about to raise his glass for his signature toast, as three men waited for those precise words. Instinctively, she leaned in, murmuring, "Don't talk." Little did she know, this desperate intervention would forever entangle her in his perilous existence. Rain lashed against Rosario's windows like restless fingers tapping on glass. Lucia meticulously cleaned the same table for the third time, her dark eyes scanning the restaurant's shadowed corners. Thursday nights typically offered a quiet rhythm, but this evening thrummed with an unusual energy. The very air seemed to hold its breath. 2 years at Rosario's had sharpened her ability to distinguish regulars, gawking tourists, and those who simply didn't belong. Tonight, 3 enigmatic men occupied booth 7, a dim, secluded corner usually shunned by patrons. Yet, they had specifically requested it. Lucia had already served them once. Their osobuco remained largely untouched, their attention consumed by hushed conversations. The youngest repeatedly checked his watch. The elder, distinguished by a scar tracing from his left ear to his jaw, fixated on the entrance. The third, a stout man with gleaming gold teeth, drummed a disquieting rhythm on the table, sending shivers down Lucia's spine. "Table 12 needs more wine." Tony, the head waiter, jolted Lucia back to the present. Grabbing a bottle of Chianti, she threaded her way through the dining room, her route taking her past booth 7. "The moment he says salute, we strike." The word struck her like a blast of Arctic air. Lucia's hand trembled subtly as she poured wine for the elderly couple at table 12, her mind racing. Salute, the Italian word for cheers. But who exactly were they targeting? Her question found its chilling answer merely 30 seconds later. The restaurant's front door swung open with a dramatic flourish, and Don Vito Castellano entered as if he commanded not just the establishment, but the entire block of realization that sent a cold shiver down Lucia's spine. He most likely did. Whispers circulated about him. The neighborhood's unofficial sovereign, the man who effortlessly resolved issues that the police either couldn't or wouldn't touch. Younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 45, with silver streaks woven into his dark hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail and every soul in a single sweeping glance. 3 men trailed behind him, their expensive suits doing little to conceal their hidden weaponry. They moved with the fluid precision of predators, meticulously scanning the room before strategically positioning themselves near the bar and by the kitchen entrance. Don Vito offered a subtle smile and a nod to familiar faces as he proceeded to his customary table, table 4, precisely at the room's center, where he commanded a full view and was equally visible to all. He was an individual who transformed dining into an elaborate performance art. "Buonasera, Don Vito." Maria, the restaurant owner, materialized instantly at his side. "Your usual table is prepared." "Perfecto," he responded, his voice resonating across the suddenly hushed restaurant. Even conversations at other tables had softened to respectful whispers. Lucia glanced back at booth 7. The 3 men had stiffened, their relaxed postures replaced by a palpable, coiled tension. The scarred man's hand had vanished beneath his jacket. The young one's gaze remained fixated on Don Vito. The heavy-set man had ceased his drumming, now gripping his napkin so tightly his knuckles gleamed white. The moment he says, "Salute, we strike," her blood turned to slush. They were here to end him. Don Vito settled into his chair with the profound satisfaction of a man utterly at home in his dominion. One of his men approached, murmuring something in his ear. Vito nodded, then gestured expansively across the restaurant. "My friends," he announced, his voice imbued with both warmth and authority. "Tonight we celebrate life, family, and the bonds that fortify us." Several diners looked up, a smile gracing their lips. This was a familiar ritual, an integral part of the Don Vito experience at Rosario's, his spontaneous toasts that imbued everyone with a sense of significance. Lucia watched in horror as he reached for his wine glass. She could discern the 3 men in booth 7 subtly shifting, their hands smoothly moving towards their jackets with practiced efficiency. In 30 seconds, perhaps even less, Don Vito would raise his glass, utter "salute," and unwittingly trigger his own demise. Time seemed to decelerate to an agonizing crawl. She could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, cold sweat beating on her forehead, despite the cool evening air. Every instinct screamed at her to remain uninvolved, to keep her head down and feign ignorance. Yet, she found she couldn't. Perhaps it was the genuine warmth in Don Vito's eyes when he smiled at Maria. Perhaps it was her upbringing in this neighborhood, where people genuinely cared for one another. Or perhaps it was simply the unbearable thought of standing by while someone perished when she held the power to prevent it. Before she could harbor a second thought, Lucia moved. She glided towards Don Vito's table with the polished efficiency of a seasoned waitress, wine bottle in hand, a luminous smile fixed on her face. To any observer, she was simply performing her duty, attentive service for a distinguished patron. "Don Vito," she murmured softly as she approached, "more wine for your celebration?" He looked up at her, and for a fleeting moment she felt the full weight of his imposing presence. His eyes were darker than she had anticipated, intelligent and keenly assessing. She noticed the small scar on his chin, the luxurious watch on his wrist, the impeccable tailoring of his suit. "Of course, Bella," he replied, raising his glass expectantly. This was it. In mere seconds he would toast the room, and the men in booth 7 would transform Rosario's into a scene of carnage. Lucia leaned forward to pour the wine, drawing her face close to his ear. To anyone watching, it appeared to be exceptionally attentive customer service, the waitress ensuring not a single drop was spilled. "Don't talk," she whispered, her voice so faint it was barely a breath against his ear. Don Vito's hand froze midair, halfway to raising his glass. She felt him go utterly still, every muscle in his body instantly alert. His eyes snapped to hers, scrutinizing her face with laser-like intensity. The restaurant held its collective breath. Everyone watched, anticipating the familiar toast that had become an intrinsic part of the Don Vito legend. Instead, he slowly lowered his glass and offered her the minutest of nods. "Perhaps," he stated carefully, "we shall savor the moment in silence tonight." Across the room, Lucia observed the 3 men in booth 7 exchange confused glances. The scarred man's hand remained beneath his jacket, but uncertainty flickered across his face. The young one checked his watch again, this time with frantic urgency. The heavy-set man's eyes darted between Don Vito and his companions. Deprived of the signal they so desperately awaited, they seemed utterly lost. Don Vito subtly raised his glass, but instead of speaking, he merely nodded to the room and took a sip. It was elegant, enigmatic, and utterly disruptive for 3 would-be assassins who required one specific word. Lucia stepped back, her legs trembling so violently she marveled at her ability to remain standing. She had done it. Somehow, impossibly, she had averted a murder without anyone else comprehending what had transpired. Except Don Vito. As she moved away from his table, she could distinctly feel his gaze following her, sensing the myriad questions forming behind those dark eyes. And in booth 7, 3 exceedingly dangerous men were beginning to grasp that their meticulously orchestrated plan had just collapsed into dust. The evening was far from over. Don Vito's fingers clasped his wine glass with the grip of a man clinging to sanity. Beneath his practiced smile, his mind raced through an intricate web of possibilities, each more perilous than the last. In his world, an unexpected whisper from a stranger typically portended one of 2 outcomes: betrayal or salvation. The critical task was discerning which one before ending up dead. He took another sip of wine, buying precious time to reflect. The attractive waitress with the urgent whisper had moved on to other tables, but he could detect her surreptitious glances in his direction. More significantly, he could feel his own men watching him, awaiting some indication of what had just transpired. "Everything all right, boss?" Marco, his most trusted bodyguard, appeared at his elbow with the effortless grace of a man who had spent 15 years preserving Vito's life. To any casual observer, he was merely inquiring if his employer required anything. In reality, his hand rested inside his jacket, fingers curled around his .45. "Perfect," Vito replied, his voice carrying just enough warmth to sound entirely natural. "Just appreciating the service here." But nothing was perfect. From the corner of his eye, he caught movement from booth 7. The 3 men he had barely registered upon entering. They were now shifting restlessly. The youngest repeatedly checked his phone. One of them, a heavy-set man with gold teeth, continuously glanced toward the exit. Vito had navigated 23 years in his father's business by implicitly trusting his instincts. And right now, those instincts were screaming, something is profoundly wrong. The waitress had known it too. But how? Marco, he said quietly, the three men in booth 7, do you see them? Marco's eyes flickered toward the corner without moving his head. Years of diligent practice had taught him how to observe without betraying his attention. Yeah, boss, been nursing the same drinks for an hour, ordered food they're not eating, tourists not dressed like tourists, too nervous to be locals. Vito offered a subtle nod. Marco perceived precisely what he did. Men who didn't belong, men with an agenda that had nothing to do with savoring Maria's renowned risotto. The waitress reappeared, this time at a table near booth 7. She was undeniably adept at her job, moving with an efficiency honed by years of practice. But Vito noticed something else. She was positioning herself strategically, where she could overhear conversations, where she could observe without seeming to. She's done this before, he realized. She's been listening. The thought, in theory, should have been reassuring. If she had caught wind of something that compelled her to caution him, it signaled her intent to safeguard him. Yet, in Vito's universe, protection invariably carried a hidden cost. Dom, he softly addressed his consigliere, who occupied a seat at the bar, commanding a sweeping vista of the entire eatery. Domenico Torino boasted 3 decades of counsel to the Castellano dynasty. He was slender as a blade, incisive as a stiletto, and possessed a mind astute enough to discern a trap from afar. He approached with his characteristic measured gait. Don Vito, the waitress who just served me. What do you make of her? Dom's cerulean gaze instantly located Lucia. He observed her for a full minute, meticulously cataloging every detail, her motions, her expressions, her interactions with other patrons. She's scared, he finally remarked, but not of us. Of something else, someone else, scared enough to approach me, scared enough to do something foolish or brave. Sometimes they're the same thing. Vito pondered this. In booth number 7, he noted 3 men engaged in what appeared to be an increasingly fervent, whispered dispute. The youngest continuously shook his head, while the scarred man's countenance grew progressively darker. Could be she's working with them, Dom continued, his voice barely audible. Could be this is some kind of elaborate setup. Get close to you. Gain your trust. Then... He didn't need to complete the sentence. Both understood the tragic conclusion of such narratives. Or, Vito mused thoughtfully, she could be the sole reason I'm still drawing breath. The trio in booth 7 now stood, hastily depositing cash on the table, suggesting their evening had veered off course. They moved toward the exit without a backward glance, but Vito caught the scarred man's eyes sweeping the restaurant one final time, akin to a predator marking territory for a future return. Lucia was clearing a nearby table as they passed. Vito watched her intently, witnessing something that sent a chill down his spine. She recognized them. More than that, she was terrified of them, the kind of profound dread stemming from an intimate knowledge of someone's capabilities. The fragments were aligning, forming a canvas both clearer and more perilous than he had initially perceived. Dom, he stated quietly, I want you to have a conversation with our waitress. After closing, ascertain what she knows and if she's dissembling. Vito's smile was sharp as shattered glass. Then, we'll uncover that too. As the 3 strangers disappeared into the rain-swept night, Vito raised his glass once more and took another sip. Whatever game was unfolding tonight, he intended to emerge victorious. But first, he needed to comprehend the rules, and the captivating waitress, with her urgent whisper, was going to help him unravel them, whether she wished to or not. The 3 men who had occupied booth 7 for the past 2 hours now stood on the rain-slicked pavement outside Rosario's, their meticulously crafted plans disintegrating like sodden paper. Vincent's scar. Moretti pulled his collar upward against the October chill, his damaged face contorted with a frustration unrelated to the weather. This is Vinny, Tommy Gallo hissed, his young face flushed with indignation. He was supposed to say it. He always says it every Thursday. Same time, same toast. Shut up and think, Scar snapped, his eyes scouring the street for any indication they were being observed. In their line of work, paranoia wasn't a character flaw, it was life insurance. Something spooked him. The third man, Angelo Goldie Russo, spat into the gutter. His gold teeth glinted in the streetlight as he spoke. Maybe he knows. Maybe someone tipped him off. Nobody knows, Tommy insisted. We've been planning this for months, only the three of us. And who? Scar's voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made grown men reevaluate their life choices. You were about to say someone else, weren't you, Tommy? The younger man's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Just Carmine. But he's solid. He wouldn't. Carmine Torino talks to his cousin every Tuesday, Goldie interrupted. His cousin who happens to work security for the Costas. You didn't think that was worth mentioning? Tommy's face blanched. In the distance, they heard the wail of sirens, likely heading to some other catastrophe, but it unsettled all three men. Lingering on the street, arguing, was unwise, yet retreating inside was not an option. We need to figure out what went wrong, Scar said, pulling out his phone. And we need to do it fast. Castellano didn't get where he is by ignoring warnings. Inside the restaurant, Lucia's hands trembled as she cleared table after table. Each swift movement or loud utterance sent her heart leaping. She had unwittingly inserted herself into a situation that could prove fatal, and the weight of that realization settled on her shoulders like lead. The three men were gone, yet their presence lingered like stale cigarette smoke. She had served them twice in the past month. Always the same booth, always the same demeanor whispering, watching, waiting. Tonight, she had finally overheard enough to comprehend the object of their vigil. You okay, Lucia? Maria appeared beside her, concern etched across her weathered face. You look pale. Just tired, Lucia managed, forcing a smile. Long day. But Maria had managed restaurants for 30 years. She could decipher people like menus. Those men in booth 7, they bothered you. Lucia's blood ran cold. If Maria had discerned something, it implied others might have as well. In a neighborhood where Don Vito held sway, asking the wrong questions could be perilous. They were fine, she said quickly. Just quiet customers. Maria studied her for another moment, then nodded. You be careful, mija. Sometimes quiet customers are the loudest problems. Across the restaurant, Lucia caught Dom Torino, observing her with those pale blue eyes that seemed to penetrate to her very soul. He had been studying her all evening, noting every glance, every gesture. She knew he had marked her as someone deserving of investigation. At his table, Don Vito played the impeccable host, conversing with other patrons, signing an autograph for a tourist's son. But Lucia could discern the tension in his shoulders, could feel the vigilant energy radiating from his bodyguards. He knew something had transpired. He just didn't know what. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. You made a mistake tonight. Lucia's breath hitched in her throat. She glanced around the restaurant, but everyone seemed absorbed in their own conversations. Another buzz. We know who you are. We know where you live. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. A third message appeared. This isn't over. 20 minutes later, the three men sat in Tommy's car 6 blocks away, engine running, heater blasting. Scar was on his third cigarette, the smoke obscuring the windows. So, what's the play? Goldie asked, checking his gun for the 12th time. We wait for another Thursday. No, Scar said, flicking his cigarette out the window. Castellano will be expecting us now. He'll alter his routine, bolster security. The restaurant play is dead. Tommy nodded eagerly. So we hit him somewhere else. His house, his office. His house has more security than Fort Knox, Goldie interrupted. And his office is in the middle of downtown. Too many witnesses. Scar smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. What about the person who warned him? The car fell silent save for the rain pattering on the roof. The waitress? Tommy inquired. What's she got to do with anything? Everything, Scar said. She's the reason our plan failed, which means she's our conduit to Castellano. We grab her, use her as bait. He comes to rescue the pretty girl who saved his life, and we finish what we started. Goldie grinned, his gold teeth glinting in the dashboard light. I like it. Personal. But first, Scar continued, we ensure she knows we're coming. Scared people make mistakes, and mistakes get people killed. He pulled out his phone and sent one more message. "Sweet dreams, Lucia." The final patron departed Rosario's at 11:47 p.m., an elderly gentleman who had savored his tiramisu as if it were the last dessert on earth. Lucia watched him shuffle out into the rain, knowing his departure signified she was now alone with the very individuals she had been striving to avoid all evening. Maria had left an hour earlier, entrusting Lucia with the closing routine. The kitchen staff had finished cleaning and vanished into the night, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the windows, and Don Vito, who sat at table 4 like a monarch holding court in an empty kingdom. His bodyguards had positioned themselves strategically, Marco near the front door, another by the kitchen entrance, and Dom Torino at the bar, his pale eyes never straying from Lucia as she wiped down tables with robotic precision. She had been dreading this moment all evening, but there was no escaping it now. Her phone had buzzed 3 more times with messages from her anonymous tormentors, each more specific than the last. They knew her address. They knew she lived alone. They knew her sister's name. "Lucia!" Don Vito's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. She turned to face him, her cleaning rag clutched in her hands like a shield. "Yes? Come sit with me." It was not a request. She approached his table on unsteady legs, every instinct screaming at her to flee. But where could she go? If she had learned anything tonight, it was that dangerous men possessed long reaches and even longer memories. Don Vito gestured to the chair opposite him. Up close, she could perceive the intelligence in his dark eyes, the way they catalogued every micro-expression on her face. This was a man who had forged an empire by reading people like open books. "You look tired," he said gently. "It's been a long evening," Lucia nodded, distrusting her voice. "Dom, bring the lady some wine. The good stuff." "I don't drink while on duty," Lucia responded, her voice strained. "You're off duty now. Tonight, you're my guest." Dom appeared beside her, offering a glass of wine that she suspected cost more than her weekly earnings. Her hands trembled as she accepted it, grateful for an outlet for her nervous energy. "Now," Don Vito began, leaning back in his chair, "tell me why you warned me against speaking." The question hung ominously, thick as smoke. Lucia stared into her wine, watching the dark liquid ripple with the frantic pulse of her heart. She could fabricate and excuse confusion, a misunderstanding anything to avoid revealing the truth. Yet, the persistent buzz of her phone, displaying a barrage of text messages, signaled that deception was no longer an option. Her continued silence would only validate Don Vito's suspicions. "I overheard them talking," she whispered, her gaze fixed on him. The 3 men in booth 7. "What exactly did you hear?" he pressed. "They were waiting for you to say something specific." "A particular word?" he inquired, a surprising gentleness softening his hardened features. "They said, 'The moment he says salute, we strike,'" Lucia confirmed. Don Vito's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Behind him, Marco sharply drew breath. "Are you absolutely certain those were their exact words?" "Yes," Lucia affirmed. "And you know what they meant." She nodded, her voice gaining a surprising conviction. "Everyone knows about your Thursday night toasts. You always end them the same way." For a prolonged moment, Don Vito remained silent, scrutinizing her face with the intensity of a jeweler examining a diamond for imperfections or deceit. "Why did you warn me?" he finally asked. "Why not simply remain quiet, ensuring your own safety?" It was a question she'd wrestled with all evening. The prudent course would have been to remain inconspicuous, to feign ignorance. But in that critical moment, she found she couldn't. "Because they would have killed you," she stated plainly, "and likely anyone else who got in their way." "You don't even know me," he observed. "I know you're Maria's friend," she countered. "I know you tipped the busboys generously at Christmas. I know you helped Mrs. Chun when those kids were harassing her at her grocery store." She took a sip of the wine, surprised by its velvety smoothness. "I know enough?" Don Vito then graced her with the first genuine smile she had witnessed all evening. "You possess excellent instincts, Lucia," he remarked, "but they might have cost you your life." Her phone vibrated once more. Instinctively she glanced at it, and the color drained from her face. "What is it?" Don Vito's voice sharpened, cutting through the sudden tension. With trembling fingers, Lucia displayed the message. 2 minutes, then we come in." Don Vito's transformation was instantaneous. The amiable dinner companion vanished, replaced by a persona far more menacing and dangerous. He snapped his fingers once, and his men moved with military precision. "Marco! Back door! Dom! Lights!" His voice remained calm, but his eyes turned cold as winter. "Lucia, get behind the bar and stay down." "What's happening?" she whispered, fear catching in her throat. Don Vito checked his watch, a predatory smile spreading across his face. It was the grin of a hunter who realized his quarry had walked directly into his trap. "Your new friends are about to discover why no one threatens what belongs to me." The lights extinguished just as the first gunshot shattered Rosario's front window. Glass shards sprayed inward like deadly rain, and Lucia screamed as Don Vito's hand clamped onto her shoulder, pulling her an instant before she could react, yanking her down behind the thick oak bar. "Stay down!" he hissed, his voice barely audible amidst the sudden chaos. More shots erupted, rapid bursts of gunfire transforming the restaurant's peaceful ambiance into a war zone. Lucia pressed herself against the bar's base, her heart hammering so violently she feared it might burst. Above her, bottles of expensive liquor exploded as bullets found their marks, showering her with glass fragments and the pungent scent of aged whiskey. "Marco, report." Don Vito's voice sliced through the gunfire with chilling calm. "3 shooters outside," came Marco's reply from somewhere near the kitchen. "Professional deployment. They know what they're doing." Don Vito cursed in Italian. In the encroaching darkness, Lucia glimpsed his silhouette moving with fluid precision. A gun materialized in his hand. She hadn't even perceived him drawing it. "Dom," Don Vito commanded. "Back exit. Blocked. 2 more out there, possibly 3 inside now." Dom's voice conveyed the same unnatural calm. "They've got us boxed in." The gunfire ceased abruptly, leaving only the sound of settling glass and Lucia's ragged breaths. In the sudden, profound silence, a voice from the street boomed, "Castellano, send out the girl, and we'll make this quick." Lucia's blood turned to ice. They weren't merely here to complete their assassination, they specifically wanted her. The bait plan, which Scar had discussed in Tommy's car earlier, was now in full, terrifying motion. "Hear that, Vito?" The mocking, confident voice continued. "Your little guardian angel is who we truly desire. Hand her over, and perhaps you'll live to see tomorrow." Don Vito's response was a single gunshot that obliterated the restaurant's remaining front window. The message was unequivocally clear. "Boss," Marco's voice carried an urgent note, "we need to move. They're probably calling in reinforcements." But Don Vito was already thinking several steps ahead, his mind operating with a cold efficiency that had kept him alive in a business where others died young. This was no random act of violence. It was a calculated assault designed to flush him out, to force him into a vulnerable position. "Lucia," he whispered, his face mere inches from hers in the darkness. "Is there another way out of this building? Service tunnels, basement access, anything?" She struggled to think through her terror. She had worked there for 2 years, but always as a waitress, never truly exploring the building's hidden corners. "The wine cellar," she managed, finally recalling something. "There's a door behind the kitchen that leads down. Maria mentioned it, connects to the old subway tunnels." Don Vito smiled grimly. "Perfect. Dom, we're moving to the cellar. Marco, provide cover." "What about the girl?" Dom's voice held a note of concern that was not, Lucia suspected, entirely for her well-being. "She's a liability." "She's our ticket out of here," Don Vito countered. "And she's under my protection now." The word protection carried immense weight in their world. It meant Lucia was no longer merely a witness or a victim. She was an asset, valuable enough for lives to be risked in her defense. More gunfire erupted as Marco laid down covering fire from his position near the kitchen. Don Vito grabbed Lucia's hand and pulled her into a crouch. "When I say run, you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Understand?" She nodded, her voice lost somewhere in her throat. "Run!" They moved through the restaurant like shadows, Don Vito's body shielding hers as they navigated between overturned tables and shattered glass. Behind them, she could hear Dom's measured footsteps and the occasional crack of his pistol as he covered their retreat. The kitchen was a labyrinth of stainless steel and shadows. Don Vito moved with the confidence of someone who had memorized every possible escape route, leading her to a heavy wooden door she had never noticed before. The cellar stairs were narrow and steep, descending into a darkness that smelled of old wine and even older secrets. As they reached the bottom, Don Vito pulled out a small flashlight, revealing walls lined with dust-covered bottles and, at the far end, another door marked with faded subway signage. "This leads to the old pneumatic postal system tunnels," he explained, checking his weapon. "They connect to Grand Central." "We can—" The sound of splintering wood echoed from above. Their pursuers had discovered the cellar entrance. "Move," Don Vito commanded, but his voice carried a new note. Not fear, but anticipation. Time to disappear. As they approached the tunnel entrance, Lucia realized that saving Don Vito's life had accomplished more than just preventing a murder. It had pulled her into a world where rules were etched in blood and loyalty, where protection demanded a price she was only just beginning to comprehend. Behind them, footsteps thundered down the cellar stairs. Ahead lay an encompassing darkness and profound uncertainty. Yet, beside her moved a man who had just declared her worth fighting for, and in her terrified state, that felt like the only solid ground in a world gone mad. 3 days later, Lucia stood in the marble foyer of the Castellano estate, feeling like Alice after tumbling down the rabbit hole. The past 72 hours had been a blur of safe houses, strategic meetings, and a creeping realization that her old life had perished the moment she whispered, "Don't talk." The estate was a formidable fortress disguised as a mansion. Rolling lawns and classical architecture concealing cameras, sensors, and enough firepower to equip a small army. Don Vito had explained it simply. Until the threat was neutralized, she was his responsibility. In his world, this implied absolute protection and complete control. "You appear agitated," Dom observed from his position by the window. He had been watching her with those calculating eyes for 3 days. Still not entirely convinced she wasn't part of some elaborate deception. "Wouldn't you be?" Lucia retorted, even surprising herself with her boldness. Fear, she was discovering, could either shatter you or steal your resolve. She was choosing resolve. Don Vito entered the room, architectural plans in hand, wearing the expression of a man who had found the perfect solution to an impossible dilemma. "Lucia, I need you to listen carefully. We're going to end this tonight." She had been mentally preparing for this conversation. The attack on Rosario's had been a declaration of war, and men like Don Vito did not retreat from wars. They won them. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady. "Be yourself," he replied, spreading the plans across his mahogany desk. "Tomorrow night, the Torino family is hosting their annual charity gala at the Venetian Hotel. 500 guests, perfect cover for what we have planned." Dom leaned forward, his lean face animated with the kind of intense focus that comes from orchestrating someone's downfall. "We've leaked information through 3 different channels that you'll be there as Don Vito's guest, protected but visible." "Bait," Lucia stated flatly. "Bait," Don Vito confirmed, "but bait with teeth." He pointed to the hotel blueprints. The Venetian boasts outstanding security, numerous exits, and a sufficient number of witnesses to deter our associates from attempting anything excessively dramatic. Yet, they will be utterly incapable of resisting this golden opportunity. "How are you so certain they will appear?" "Because they're desperate," Dom supplied. The assault on Rosario's was intended to be swift and impeccable. Instead, they suffered humiliation, exposed their operations, and achieved absolutely nothing. They must conclude this matter before word spreads that they tried and failed to eliminate a made man. Don Vito's expression turned grim. "More importantly, they threatened you. In my realm, that's equivalent to threatening me directly. No one walks away from that." Lucia meticulously reviewed the hotel blueprints, striving to decipher the intricate strategic game unfolding around her. What if something goes awry? What if they deem the risk acceptable and simply initiate gunfire? "They won't," Don Vito stated with unwavering conviction. "Too many onlookers, excessive security, too many ways for it to backfire on them. Their strategy will be to isolate you, to get you alone. That's precisely when we'll apprehend them. And how, precisely, will you apprehend them if I'm solitary with 3 assassins?" Don Vito smiled, and for the first time since their acquaintance, it was a genuinely warm expression. "Who said you'd be alone?" He approached a wall safe concealed behind a hidden panel and retrieved a compact device resembling a sophisticated hearing aid. The latest technology from our contacts in Hong Kong, transmitter, receiver, and GPS tracker, all integrated. You'll never be out of communication. Furthermore, Marco interjected, materializing in the doorway with his characteristic silent efficiency, the Venetian possesses remarkable acoustics. Sound propagates beautifully through the air vents. Dom presented her with his phone, displaying a detailed seating chart. We'll have personnel stationed at every exit, every stairwell, every service corridor. The instant they make their move, they'll be surrounded. But they're unaware of that, Lucia remarked, a dawning comprehension in her voice. Precisely. From their viewpoint, you're a frightened server seeking refuge behind her new protector's wealth and influence, an effortless target amidst a crowd teeming with distractions. Don Vito drew nearer, his tone gentle yet resolute. I won't mislead you, Lucia. There's an inherent risk. These aren't rational individuals. They are desperate, and desperate individuals perform unpredictable actions. However, this is the sole path to resolution. Fleeing merely postpones the inevitable. Lucia reflected on the text messages that continued to arrive despite her new phone and concealed location. Inexplicably, they persistently discovered methods to reach her, to remind her of the ongoing hunt. The estate offered safety, but it was also a confinement. She couldn't evade indefinitely. What transpires afterward? She inquired. When this concludes, what becomes of me? Don Vito and Dom exchanged a meaningful glance that conveyed volumes. That hinges on your desires. You saved my life, Lucia. In my world, that forges bonds that are not easily broken. This signifies that you will always have my protection. But protection entails obligations. You'll now be part of our family, whether you choose it or not. The gravity of those words settled upon her shoulders. She had preserved a life, and in doing so, forfeited her freedom. Yet, contemplating the alternative, spending the remainder of her days looking over her shoulder, awaiting Scar and his associates to complete their initial endeavor, the decision seemed unequivocal. When do we commence? She asked. Don Vito's smile was as sharp as a razor. Tomorrow night, you're going to assist us in apprehending some killers. The grand ballroom of the Venetian Hotel sparkled like a treasure chest, with 500 of the city's elite intermingling beneath crystal chandeliers that likely cost more than most homes. Lucia navigated the throng in a midnight blue gown, its price tag undoubtedly exceeding her monthly rent, feeling every bit the part of a pampered mafia princess. Yet, beneath the elegant facade, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Breathe, Don Vito murmured beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back as they moved through the crowd. To all observers, they appeared as a powerful man showcasing his stunning companion. The reality, however, was considerably more perilous. I sense their gaze, Lucia whispered back, accepting a flute of champagne from a passing waiter. The minuscule device in her ear crackled softly with Dom's voice. Southeast corner, near the service door. Scar has just arrived. He's attempting to appear nonchalant, but he's surveying the exits. Don Vito's smile remained unwavering as he guided Lucia towards the dance floor. Right on schedule. Marco, report. Tommy is in the lobby, feigning phone usage. Goldie is outside in a black sedan, engine idling. Marco's voice was calm, professional. They are committed. The charity auction was in full swing, wealthy benefactors bidding exorbitant sums on luxury vacation packages and coveted artwork, while servers circulated with champagne and canapes. It was the quintessential camouflage for predators stalking their quarry. Now comes the difficult part, Don Vito softly articulated, as they swayed to the orchestra's rendition of a classic waltz. In 5 minutes, I will feign an urgent business call. You will be alone for precisely 10 minutes. 10 minutes to ensnare 3 assassins. 10 minutes for them to believe they have an opportunity. His dark eyes met hers, and she glimpsed steel beneath the warmth. Remember, they require you alive. You are their conduit to me. But once they have you isolated... He didn't need to elaborate. They both understood the grim conclusion of that narrative. The music swelled around them, and Lucia found herself immersed in the surreal nature of the moment. just a week ago. Her primary concern had been whether her tips would cover her electricity bill. Now she was waltzing with a man who could arrange assassinations with a phone call, preparing to help capture killers at a charity gala. "Don Vito," she began abruptly, "after tonight, when this is all over, will I ever be able to return to normalcy?" His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "There's no going back, Lucia, but that doesn't mean there's no going forward." Dom's voice crackled in her ear once more. "Movement. Scar is heading towards the service corridor. He's positioning for the grab." Don Vito spun her elegantly as the song reached its crescendo, then drew her close. To any observer, it appeared romantic. In actuality, he was checking the small tracking device embedded in her necklace. "It's time," he declared. He kissed her hand with theatrical flourish, loud enough for nearby guests to overhear him say, "I'll be right back, Caramelia. Don't go anywhere." Then he disappeared, moving through the crowd with the self-assuredness of a man who commanded every room he entered. Lucia stood solitary beside the dance floor, acutely aware of the scrutiny from hundreds of eyes. Some belonged to genuine guests who had noticed her arrival with Don Vito. Others belonged to the predators closing in. She moved towards the terrace, meticulously executing the script they had rehearsed. Fresh air, a moment of solitude, the ideal opportunity for someone to approach her. "Dom, I'm moving into position," she whispered, her lips barely parting. "Copy that. We have eyes on all 3 targets. You're doing splendidly." The terrace was nearly deserted, with only a few guests savoring the October evening air and the panorama of the city lights below. Lucia positioned herself near the railing, portraying a woman lost in contemplation. She didn't have to wait long. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Lucia turned to find Scar approaching, impeccably dressed in an expensive tuxedo. Up close, she could discern the full extent of the damage to his face, a puckered line of scar tissue that spoke of violence endured rather than evaded. "Yes," she managed, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "Very peaceful." "Peaceful," he reiterated, moving closer. "That's an ironic word considering—" "Considering what?" Scar's smile was the stuff of nightmares. "Considering you're about to accompany me, and we're going to have a discussion about your friend, Vito." Behind him, Tommy emerged from the shadows near the service door. In her peripheral vision, she caught movement from the main ballroom, Goldie positioning himself to intercept her retreat. "I don't think so," Lucia stated, surprising herself with her composure. "I don't believe you have a choice." Scar reached inside his jacket, his intentions unambiguous. This was it, the moment the trap would either spring or everything would go catastrophically wrong. But instead of drawing a weapon, Scar froze, his eyes widening in confusion, then fear. All around the terrace, men in expensive suits emerged from the shadows, their own weapons drawn with professional efficiency. The charity guests had vanished as if by magic, leaving only predators and prey. Vincent Moretti. Don Vito's voice sliced through the night air like a blade. "I believe he wished to have a conversation." 2 weeks after the Venetian hotel incident, Lucia sat in the same restaurant where everything had commenced, yet nothing was as it had been. Rosario's had undergone a comprehensive renovation, boasting new windows, new furniture, and a security system that would put Fort Knox to shame. Maria bustled around the kitchen as usual, but now 2 men in expensive suits, who never seemed to eat much, were always strategically positioned to observe the doors. The official narrative was that Don Vito had decided to invest in a beloved neighborhood restaurant. The truth was far more intricate. "You're overthinking it," Don Vito remarked from across the table, carving his veal with surgical precision. "I can practically hear the gears turning from here." Lucia looked up from her untouched risotto, just wondering what happened to them, Scar and the others. Does it matter? It was a simple question with a complex answer. 3 weeks prior, she would have deeply cared about the fate of 3 men, even dangerous ones. Now, after everything she had witnessed and assimilated, she found her moral compass had shifted in ways that should have disturbed her more than they did. "I suppose not," she finally conceded. Don Vito studied her with those dark eyes that missed nothing. Before their departure, they divulged every crucial detail we needed to know. It became clear they operated with accomplices. The Torino cousins from Chicago harbored ambitions of encroaching upon our territory. believing my demise would incite sufficient chaos for them to gain a foothold. Today they are disabused of that notion. His smile was predatory. It's astonishing how swiftly individuals reassess their expansion strategies when their advance operatives vanish without a trace. Lucia nodded, internalizing this new reality where people simply departed or disappeared, rather than facing arrest or trial. It was now Don Vito's domain, and whether by her own volition or by the currents of fate, she found herself inextricably entwined within it. Speaking of new arrangements, he continued, reaching into his jacket, I have something significant for you. The small velvet box, outwardly innocuous, belied the truth Lucia had painstakingly learned. Nothing in this world was ever truly as it appeared. Within lay a ring, not a betrothal ring, but something far more profound. A substantial golden band emblazoned with the Castellano family crest. This was the kind of adornment that conveyed messages without uttering a single word. I don't comprehend, she murmured. You rescued my life, Lucia. But beyond that, you demonstrated intelligence, courage, and unwavering loyalty precisely when it mattered most. These are qualities I do not treat lightly. She rotated the ring in her hands, sensing its unexpected heft. What does this signify? It means you are now family, not by lineage, but by choice and circumstance, which often forge bonds stronger than blood. He settled back into his chair, his expression grave. It means you will never lack for anything: protection, resources, opportunities. It also implies specific expectations, unwavering fidelity, absolute discretion, the understanding that certain conversations never transpired, certain names are never uttered to outsiders. His voice resonated with undeniable authority. It means that when I require something of you, you execute it without question, and it means that any individual who imperils you directly imperils me. Lucia slid the ring onto her finger. It settled perfectly, as if it had been custom crafted for her. And if I ever wish to depart, to revert to being an ordinary person, Don Vito's laughter was soft, devoid of mirth. Cara mia, you ceased being an ordinary person the moment you whispered, "Don't speak, there's no one doing that." A poignant hint of a past peril. But why would you desire such a thing? He gestured around the restaurant, indicating the opulent renovations, the subtle markers of influence and security that now permeated her daily existence. You possess respect now, security, purpose. How many individuals can genuinely claim their life holds such meaning? Lucia surveyed Rosario's, perceiving it through a newly acquired lens. The establishment was now splendid, lucrative, and secure. Maria smiled more readily. Her anxieties about rent or disruptive patrons significantly diminished.